Here's a test. Ready? Moadim l'simcha. All right, let's try that again. All right, so I'll do the first part, and then we'll do the second part together. Moadim l'simcha, and then we say chagim uzmanim l'sason. Let's do that one more time. Chagim uzmanim l'sason. And by 3 years from now, we'll totally have it down. Is everyone feeling happy? Well, you are supposed to be, because as we established when we analyzed these greetings at the beginning of our service tonight, that this is what Sukkot is all about. But is it possible for us to be happy just because we're supposed to be? On the one hand, it is a delightfully light feeling to know that we've done the hard work of the High Holy Days, that our spiritual slates are clean, and so are our breakfast dishes. We have the whole year ahead to become the people that we've aspired to be over the course of the days of awe. On the other hand, this is also when the real work begins. I'm sure you've all heard the saying that it's not about our behavior between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that counts, but our behavior between Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, right? That's a much longer time. Coming out of these holy days, we've had to face the darkest corners of ourselves that we can't help but notice once we've chanted Ashamnu for what feels like the 100th time. And with this reality all around us, we might not really be in the mood for mandatory rejoicing. In the spirit of Sukkot, in the spirit of this Zman Simchatenu, I'd like to share with you a short story for tonight, written by Deborah Gordon Zaslow, but perfect for this time of year, called The Magic Gourd. Once, long ago, there was a young couple who was truly in love. They decided to be married in the autumn under the canopy of the Sukkah in the presence of their friends and relatives. And when the time came, they invited the Ushpizin, the ancestors, and said their vows with the full moon peeking through the schach. Those are the branches that line the sukkah roof. After the ceremony, the guests came forth to offer gifts and blessings to the couple. And suddenly a stranger stepped forward, as they often do in these stories. He had, of course, a long, full beard, a lined face, and rumpled clothes. Everyone was puzzled. He must be from another town, they murmured to each other, probably traveling through. The man spoke to the bride and the groom. "Because your love is so true, I have a special gift for you." And he held out a smooth, round gourd that gleamed in the soft light. "This gourd is magic," he said, "and it contains a wish, but only one wish. So you must use it very wisely and very carefully. Don't waste it." The guests stared at this strange man as he continued. "The wish must be made in the autumn when the moon is full. Come into the sukkah and speak to the ancestors. Then together agree on your wish before you make it." The strange man handed them the gourd, and before they could thank him, he was gone. They hung the gourd in the center of the sukkah, where the moonlight gave it a special glow. It so happened that a greedy man among the guests overheard the story about the magic gourd, and that night he snuck into the sukkah in the wee hours of the morning, stole the gourd, and replaced it with another that, of course, looked identical, but was as empty of wishes as the air. On the way home in his wagon, he was so excited thinking about how the gourd would make him rich that he forgot to look where he was going. He drove his wagon off the road into a mud hole where its wheels became hopelessly stuck. And the more he tried to get out, the deeper he sank. Finally, in desperation, he yelled, "I wish I was out of this mess!" And instantly, he was on dry land. And the single wish was wasted and gone forever. Meanwhile, the young couple started their life together, and when the winter rains came, they brought the gourd into their home to keep it protected throughout the year. In the autumn, they hung it in the center of their sukkah, thinking, of course, that it still contained a wish. And everything went well for them for a few years, but after a while, their business began to fail, and they had trouble making ends meet. That year, on the first day of Sukkot, the woman turned to her husband and said, "I think it's time to use our wish. If we could only get on our feet financially, I think that everything would fall into place." Her husband agreed. So that evening they went into the sukkah, and they sat for a while in the stillness, and they welcomed in the ancestors, Sarah, Rachel, Rebekah, Leah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they invited the spirits of their grandparents and all those who came before them. And when they felt their presence, they spoke to the ancestors silently. When it was time to make their wish, they placed their hands on the gourd. But then the husband spoke. I've been thinking, maybe if we concentrate on our work and we work together a little harder, we can make a go of it without wasting this wish. We might really need it later. His wife nodded. So that night, they ate dinner in the sukkah under the stars without using the wish that, of course, wasn't there anyway. From that moment on, they concentrated on working together and working harder until business began to improve. And after a time, they were earning plenty of money to get by. A few years passed, and one day the husband said to his wife, "There's only one thing missing from our life." And she knew just what he meant: a baby. So again, they entered the sukkah on the full autumn moon, and they sat in silence. And they invited in the ancestors and waited until the sukkah filled with the holiness of those who came before them. And they put their hands on the gourd, ready to make the wish. And the wife spoke, I think we should be patient. Perhaps if we pray for a child, if we wait, maybe we'll still be blessed with one. Who knows, we might need this wish another time. And her husband agreed. And so they prayed for a child, and they waited patiently, and eventually they were lucky to be blessed with a baby. And a few years later, another baby arrived, and then another, and the children grew up, and the man and the woman grew old. One day the wife turned to her husband and said, "I think it's time we used our wish." And he nodded, for he knew the only thing she would wish for: to be young again, to live forever. So they went into the sukkah, where the gourd hung in the glow of the moon, and they invited in the ancestors and sat quietly with them in the soft light. And when they put their hands on the gourd and looked into each other's eyes, they both shook their heads and said, "Not yet." For in the moonlight, they realized that their love would live forever, just like the spirits of their ancestors. Who knows? Someday, maybe we'll really need that wish. So they went back into the house, and they grew older. And eventually the husband passed away, and the wife followed soon after. And their children kept the gourd and passed it on to their children, who passed it on to their children through the generations. And many years later, when their great-great-grandchildren were decorating the sukkah, one of them unearthed the gourd and called to her brother, "Look at this old gourd. I think there was some kind of story to it." And they passed it back and forth. And his sister said, "I remember Grandma told me it was a wedding present to her grandparents. She said it was magic and it had a wish." The great-granddaughter shook the gourd and handed it to her brother. "Feels empty now. They must have used it up." They laughed. He held the gourd to his ear. "This is strange. You can hear something inside," he said, "kind of like a seashell." He handed it to his sister. She held it to her ear. "It sounds like the wind or like whispering voices." His eyes widened. Maybe it still has magic. They hung it carefully in the center of the sukkah, and that night when they invited in the ushpizin, the sukkah filled with the quiet voices of the ancestors as the gourd shone with the light of the moon. The story teaches us that Zman Simchatenu isn't magic. Sukkot doesn't become a joyful season on its own. We don't become joyful without work. We are all responsible for and capable of creating our own happiness. And there are times when it is harder, yes, and sometimes our own challenges and chemistry require help and support, and sometimes a redefining of what happiness will mean at this particular time for each one of us. But just because one or some of the chest-tapping Ashamnu repetitions were true for us, it doesn't mean that the pursuit of happiness can't be true for us as well. Rabbi Laura Novak Weiner writes that our tradition affirms that happiness comes from the choices that we make each day, how we live, and with whom we are in relationship. These choices are surely in our control. We've spent the first part of the month of Tishrei evaluating the year that has passed, and now the time has come to make the choices, to be the people who strive for happiness, to both allow ourselves to enter a Moadim L'Simcha, a season of happiness, and be the people who are creating Chagim Uzmanim L'Sason, holidays, and seasons for rejoicing. With wishes that we may all find goodness and happiness and joy in the year ahead, we offer sweet words of greeting. May it be a Shana Tova, a Moadim L'Simcha, and of course, may we all have a Shabbat Shalom.